Are you in the construction industry and wondering whether you're due a rebate? Watch on and I'll tell you. So as business accountants, we deal a lot with construction companies, and as a result, we deal with a lot of subcontractors. And every year there's a ton of discussion amongst different clients and also people that I know in the trade about how much of a rebate they're going to get. Now, one of the interesting things about repayments is the question shouldn't really be how much am I going to get? It's am I due one? So let's go back to real basics. And in this video, what I'm going to do is run you through why you would get a rebate, how much you should expect, and some of the reasons why you might not get as much of a rebate as your friend is telling you he did. But before I do, please make sure to click the subscribe button below so that you get notified every time we put out a video on topics just like this and other tax tips. So are you due a rebate? The first question. Now, that's the most important one, and how it works is you get a repayment because as a construction industry worker, generally you get taxed a flat 20 or 30% against your income. So your contractor will deduct that from you, goes in the tax man's pocket and in the bank for you, and it gets you get a little voucher every month, or you should do. And that's the bit that when you complete your tax return, it will show you how much tax you've got deducted on all of those vouchers. And you put that into the pot, and we have your income on one side, and it churns out your tax bill. And on the other side, the pot of money that the tax man has for you. And generally what happens in the construction industry world is that you've got more in the bank than you have tax due. And as a result, you get repayment. Now, what happens is quite often in the early years, while you're still getting your feet and everything, you get a really nice chunky repayment. And then as you start to earn more and more money, what you find out is sometimes you don't even get a repayment, you actually owe money. Now, the reason this occurs is that the reason rebates normally occur actually, before we talk about that, is that this 20 or 30% is deducted flat. What it doesn't take into account is that if it's your only job and your only sort of source of income, you get 12.5 grand at the time of recording this video, tax-free each year. So they're deducting 20%, but the first 12.5 you shouldn't pay any on. So that's quite often why you get a repayment. But what that doesn't take into account is national insurance. So national insurance, again at the time of recording the video, about 9.5 grand you get to earn free. The rest of it you end up paying as a self-employed person, 9%. And then there's a little like 150 quid a year type bill that goes on the bottom of there as well. So as a result, quite often you get a nice repayment at the end of it. But as you start to move up in the earnings levels, you start to pay a lot of national insurance. If you think about it, your tax is 20% and you're getting taxed 20%, but there's no provision for the 9% national insurance. So as a result, as you start to earn money and your national insurance bill starts to skyrocket, that's where your repayment starts to get eaten away. And every year we have clients who are a little bit sad sometimes when they see that they've had a good year, which is great. Tax is a success fee, as I often say. Unfortunately, it doesn't feel like it when your repayment's a little bit less if you're used to more. So that's generally why you would get a rebate and how it often occurs. So what tends to happen then is, of course, you compare it with your friends. You say, oh, what do you get? And the standard rebate that always seems to be bantered around is, I got 2.5 grand, mate. I got 2.5 grand. And 2.5 grand's interesting because we see every year clients coming to us who are in trouble with the HMRC, the tax man, because they've been claiming 2.5 grand every year, been doing it themselves and effectively fiddling around with the figures till they got a 2.5 grand rebate. Every year someone is in for this. And the bottom line is HMRC have data on all the people in the subcontract industry. They can check mathematically whether your figures look in line with other people and all these sorts of things that they do to check, and then they will inquire into your tax return if something looks off. So the first thing is, of course, do not fraudulently claim it. You need to make sure you've got a list of all your expenses, and for some subcontractors there isn't actually that many expenses. You might have your boots, you might have like high-vis jackets, hats, the odd hand tools, that kind of stuff. You might pay someone 20 quid a week in fuel and all these kind of things, but there's not loads of them, but you want to make sure you get all those. That's going to help you rebate. But ultimately, these bigger rebates that people get, a lot of the time, the only reason they're getting them is because they're fraudulently putting some materials or whatever else on the tax return to do it. And unfortunately, there are some accountants, and I use the term loosely, who are involved in this kind of stuff. Regulated accountants and proper accountants do not get involved with this, and as a result, I think sometimes you have to ask your friends, who's doing this tax return for you. Is it them doing it? Is it somebody else who's a little bit suspect doing it? There is that kind of thing. Of course, your friend could also be telling you porcupines in terms of how much they're getting, but as we do see it, and we do see the back end of it when people found themselves in trouble, it's completely commonplace that people will get these type of rebates. But you've got to be correct about it, you know. These days, there are massive penalties for doing this kind of thing. So if you get it wrong and deliberately wrong, you can pay up to 100% back. So you're paying back what you owe, plus another 100% plus interest. So it really is expensive. So don't go doing that. Get it properly. And what you really want is an accountant that's going to look after you in terms of making sure all the expenses you can claim are in there. There's 22,000 pages of tax law just to the left of me here. And as a result, you need to know all those possible avenues of legal things you could do to make that rebate bigger. Now, the other thing that people often say is, oh yeah, what I do, mate, is I buy a van every year and that van reduces my tax bill. Well, that's cool. Let's say your van's 10 grand. There's currently an allowance that lets you offset 10 grand against your tax bill in the year you buy it. That's amazing because you've spent the 10 grand. Why shouldn't you have the full 10 grand? But that 10 grand, let's say you pay 20% tax, that's only a £2,000 saving. So say that again, £10,000 van, it comes off your profit, so it probably save you about £2,000, maybe some national insurance, so let's call it, you know, 2,900 quid, like, you know, that kind of value, right? Somewhere between 2 and 3 grand it's going to save you. So you've spent 10 to save 2 or 3 grand. It doesn't make any sense. If you need a new van, by all means go and get it. It's going to reduce your tax bill, but spending money to increase your repayment is not really a clever idea in the grand scheme of things. But if you do need things, then of course buying them and setting them against your tax is going to help your refund. The other thing, going back to the refunds your friend might be getting, is going back to the original point we were talking about national insurance. Quite often you just might be earning more than him, and as a result your tax rebate gets eaten into by the amount of national insurance you're paying. So it's really difficult to compare like for like and say, well, my mate's accountant got on X, or, you know, he's done it himself and got Y. It's just depending on his circumstances and depending what expenses he has. He might also just be not earning a lot of money. If you imagine you're getting deducted 20% tax straight away, if it turns out that he only earned 12.5 grand tax-free, you should only be paying £200 in tax. So of course he's going to get a bigger rebate than you, but you might have earned double him. So it's very difficult to say just by comparing rebates whether you've got it right or not. But unfortunately, it is actually just simple maths, you know, straightforward. This thing goes in a calculation, it churns out the tax you should pay and the tax you've paid. That's it. The magic in it, I suppose, in terms of getting it legally right, is to make sure you've got all your expenditure. You know, what you're doing if you're using an office in your house to write up any of your books and your invoices, you know, what you're doing about travel, hand tools, all these things we mentioned. It's making sure you capture all of those. And of course, one of the questions people always ask is, how do I actually get my rebate? Well, to get your rebate, you need to do a tax return. We've got other videos talking about those particular things. Accountants can help you with it. It's possible to do it yourself. You can just sign up for a government gateway account and you will get access to do it online. Again, the form, once you know what you're doing, is not actually that complex. The complex bit is making sure that you've got everything right in it, especially if you've had some employment or some other income alongside it. It can be quite difficult to make sure you've got it all sorted. So that's where an accountant will help you out, that and making sure that you've legally got as many of the expenses as possible in against your tax. And then what happens is when you submit that, presuming that there's no issues, you'd normally put your bank details in there. The Revenue and Customs will pay it to you pretty quickly once they get it. And actually each year we see that seems to get quicker and quicker, presuming there's no flags. If there's been a bit of a delay, it's worth giving them a call just to find out, because sometimes if they've had post return from your address or something like that, they just put a flag against your account and none of the money moves. The other thing that's worth saying is with the tax return, it is once a year that you do it. So we've had a client once question why his friends were suddenly getting a rebate and he wasn't, and it's because we'd done his so far in advance, and as soon as we could, he'd actually had it ages before they did. So your tax return's normally due on the 31st of January each year, but you can do it anywhere after about the 6th of April. So probably mid-April is realistic, especially if you're waiting for your subcontractor vouchers to come through. So you do it on there, and then it will come in as soon as you've submitted it. It normally takes about 28 days if nothing's gone wrong to get that repayment we mentioned. But going back to the original bit I said at the beginning, just make sure your contractor is giving you a voucher each month with all your tax on, because that's your proof of your tax deduction. And if the taxman ever looks at it or there's a problem and they don't pay the rebate, it's normally because the figures you've put on there with the tax don't match what they're expecting. So really do use those vouchers as the key document to make sure that's where you're getting your numbers from. So that's it. That's all the key points you need to know about tax rebates, as they're known, or tax repayments as we would call them. If you have any questions on that, please do drop it in the comments and I'd love to chat to you. In the meantime, if you've enjoyed this video, please do share it with your friends and check out the other videos on our channels for useful guides just like this. Thanks very much. See you on the next one.